Let's do this question. So read the question first. If 20.0 gram of sodium hydroxide with 30.0 gram of sulfuric acid to produce sodium sulfate, how many grams of sodium sulfate will be produced? So here, both the amount of the reactants given. So I'm going to label that this is sodium hydroxide and this one is sulfuric acid. So you have two given reactants. This is given 1 and given 2. So I'm going to write that under here. So you have 20.0 gram of NaOH and 30.0 gram of sulfuric acid. And you are looking for this product, which is sodium sulfate, and you find the value in grams. So it is a grams to gram conversion. Okay, so first step for all stoichiometric questions, you have to balance equation. Let's check whether it is balanced or not. So this one is sodium and this one has only one sodium on left side, 2 sodium on the other side. So I would go multiply this with the 2. And that change hydrogen, there are 2 hydrogen plus 2, 4 hydrogen. So I will multiply this with the 2. And sulfate is balanced. So this equation is balanced right now. Okay, the question is asking for what is the limiting reactant and which reactant is the excess and how much of that is in excess. So we have to do 3 steps. Let's start from the given one. So if there are 2 givens, in all type of question you have to start 2 separate chart and decide how much product will be there. So the first one, you are going to see from this much sodium hydroxide how much gram of sodium sulfate will be there. Second, you have to see from 30.0 gram of sulfuric acid how much sodium sulfate will be there. So 2 separate T chart. Okay, we'll start the T chart. So first one, it is 20.0 gram of sodium hydroxide. Remember, if gram is given, the easy way, just copy that unit down. And you have to go to the periodic table and find the value of sodium, oxygen and hydrogen. Add them together, you will get 40 gram. That is molar mass. Molar mass will be always the mass of 1 mole of that compound. So now you cannot do conversion from gram to gram directly. We always need to convert gram into mole. So you converted the sodium hydroxide into moles of sodium hydroxide. Now we need the ratio between the moles of this to moles of that. Copy this unit down. Moles of NaOH. How many moles of NaOH? So the coefficient is the number of moles. So we are going to write 2 mole of NaOH and there is no coefficient. That means it is 1 mole of Na2SO4. So now you got the moles. If the question is asking for moles, you can stop here. But here it is asking in grams. So we need to convert the moles of that into grams of sodium sulfate. Same strategy, there are 2 sodium, 1 sulfur, 4 oxygen, multiply and add them together. So when you add, you will get 142.04 gram of sodium hydroxide. Okay, so when you multiply and add them, multiply and divide, you will get 35.5 gram of sodium sulfate. Okay, then we are repeating that with the second given. We need another T chart. with the given this time the second reactant, we are going to see this much sulfuric acid can produce how much sodium sulfate if the other one is excess. We are assuming the other one is excess right now. So the 30.0 gram of H2SO4, and since it is gram of H2SO4, use the periodic table to find the mass, which is 98 grams. 1 mole of sodium hydroxide. Okay, so we converted sulfuric acid into mole. Now look at how many moles of sulfuric acid. What is the coefficient here? There is only, so messed up. Okay, there is only 1 mole of sulfuric acid. So 1 mole of sulfuric acid, and which will produce 1 mole of sodium sulfate. Okay, then everything after that you can just copy from the previous question. That is easy method. You don't need to calculate it again. I think it's 142 or 124. Let me see, that's correct. Okay, then you multiply, you will get 43.4 grams of sodium sulfate. So now you did two separate T-chart and you got two final product. Look at the values and decide the theoretical yield. Theoretical yield is always the smallest value. So highlight that and write that is your theoretical yield. You can produce only this much, even though sulfuric acid can produce this much, because this reactant is the reactant which limited the amount of product. So we will call sodium hydroxide as the limiting reactant, because that is the one runs out first. So go ahead and answer this question. Your theoretical yield is this. Which reactant gave you that amount? That is your limiting reactant. So sodium hydroxide is deciding how much product we can make. And the other reactant, we know that we have more sulfuric acid, so that will be the excess reactant, which is present in excess. Okay, now the question is asking for how many grams of excess reactant will be remaining. So there are two ways to do it. You can either start from this sodium hydroxide and look how much sulfuric acid needed for that, or start from theoretical yield and look how much sulfuric acid needed for making this. Since this makes more sense, you can use that. That's up to you. I'm going to use this method. Okay, I will always pick this is the product I can make. Okay, now we will do the backward. How much sulfuric acid needed for that? Sodium sulfate, my bad. Sodium sulfate. Okay, so 35.5 gram of sodium sulfate. Then how much gram of, what is the molar mass? Which is 142.04 gram of sodium sulfate is 1 mole of sodium sulfate. Okay, then equation, 1 mole of sodium sulfate needed 1 mole of sulfuric acid. You don't need to do any molar mass calculation. You can just use from the previous T chart. So then 1 mole of sulfuric acid will be 98 gram of sulfuric acid. That's one way to do it. Or you can start from the limiting reactant, do the same strategy, and you will get the answer, which is 24.5 gram of sulfuric acid is needed. So this is the amount actually needed for producing it, or it is the amount actually used. So how much will be in excess? We have 30 gram given. To find the excess reactant, so the given amount that is the initial amount of the reactant minus how much needed or how much used. So it will be 30.0 gram of sulfuric acid minus, so that is a minus sign, minus 24.5 gram of sulfuric acid. So the answer is 5.5 gram. Remember, it is a subtraction. You have to follow the lowest decimal. That is only one decimal, not the sig fig for subtraction. So the final answer for that one is 5.5 gram of sulfuric acid. This is how we are deciding the limiting reactant and excess reactant and calculating the excess reactant.